The stars stretched endlessly across the viewport as the Destiny's Hope cruised through space at speeds that would have seemed impossible just 50 years ago. Inside the diplomatic cruiser, Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison stood at his post near the main corridor, his eyes constantly scanning for any sign of trouble. He had been assigned to protect Ambassador Gregory Hayes and his daughter during this critical mission, and he took that responsibility seriously. Jake was a career military man, 32 years old with sharp blue eyes and close-cropped brown hair. He had seen combat before, fought in 3 different conflicts across human space, but nothing had prepared him for the weight of this particular assignment. This wasn't just another protection detail. The entire future of humanity's place in the galaxy might depend on what happened in the next few days. 12-year-old Sophie Hayes walked past him in the corridor, her blonde hair bouncing as she practically skipped toward the observation deck. She was excited about seeing an alien world for the first time, despite her father's warnings to stay calm and professional. Jake couldn't help but smile slightly at her enthusiasm. The girl reminded him of his younger sister back on Earth, full of wonder and innocent curiosity about everything. "Stay where I can see you, Sophie," Jake called out gently. The girl turned and gave him a quick nod before pressing her face against the viewport. Through the transparent material, the planet Thrixia loomed larger by the minute. It was a world of purple and green continents, covered in crystalline structures that glittered in the light of its blue sun. Ambassador Hayes joined Jake at his position, adjusting his formal diplomatic uniform. The man looked tired, with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of many sleepless nights spent preparing for this mission. "How are you feeling about all this, Morrison?" the ambassador asked quietly. "Ready for anything, sir," Jake replied, though he wasn't sure that was entirely true. How could anyone be ready to meet the Vryn? The alien empire controlled a quarter of the known galaxy, commanded weapons that could destroy entire planets, and had a military force that dwarfed humanity's combined fleets by a factor of 10. More concerning was their reputation for being cold, ruthless, and dismissive of species they considered weak. "The Vryn don't respect softness," Hayes said, as if reading Jake's thoughts. "Everything I've learned about their culture suggests they value strength above all else. They see compassion as weakness, diplomacy as cowardice. I'm honestly not sure how we're going to convince them that humans are worth their time." Jake watched Sophie at the viewport, still marveling at the alien world. "Maybe we show them that strength comes in different forms, sir." The ambassador gave him a curious look but said nothing more. The ship's intercom crackled to life, announcing their final approach to Thrixia. Within the hour, they would be landing at the royal capital and the real test would begin. The landing was smooth, but the moment the ship's doors opened, Jake felt the temperature of the situation drop. A delegation of Vryn warriors stood waiting on the landing platform, their reptilian features impossible to read. They were tall, easily 7 feet on average, with scales that shimmered in shades of silver and blue. Their eyes were a piercing amber color that seemed to look straight through the humans, as if measuring their worth in an instant. Leading the Vryn delegation was someone who could only be described as imposing. She stood even taller than the others, with scales that held a reddish tint beneath the silver. A crown of crystalline spikes grew naturally from her head, marking her as royalty. This was Queen Kalira the Unyielding, ruler of the Vryn Empire. Jake felt Sophie move closer to her father as the Vryn Queen approached. The child's earlier excitement had transformed into understandable nervousness. Ambassador Hayes stepped forward and began the formal greeting protocols that had been prepared by Earth's diplomatic corps. The Queen listened with an expression that suggested boredom or perhaps disdain. "Humans," Queen Kalira said, her voice carrying a strange harmonic quality that the translation devices struggled to interpret properly. "You come seeking alliance, seeking protection from the threats that surround your small territory of space. Why should the Vryn Empire concern itself with a species that can barely defend its own worlds?" The ambassador launched into his prepared speech about mutual benefits, shared resources, and the potential for cultural exchange. Jake watched the Queen's face carefully and saw nothing that suggested she was impressed. If anything, her expression grew colder with each diplomatic phrase. The Vryn warriors around her shifted their weight slightly, and Jake recognized the body language of soldiers who were losing patience. The humans were led into the royal palace, a massive structure built from crystalline materials that seemed to grow organically from the planet's surface. The architecture was both beautiful and intimidating, with sharp angles and soaring heights that made humans feel small and insignificant. Jake stayed close to Sophie, who clutched her father's hand tightly as they walked through corridors filled with Vryn citizens who stopped to stare at the alien visitors. The throne room was enormous, easily the size of a sports stadium back on Earth. Queen Kalira took her position on a raised platform, surrounded by her court officials and military commanders. The human delegation was directed to stand in the center of the room, exposed and vulnerable. Jake didn't like the tactical situation at all. Too much open space, too many potential threats, and only 3 human security personnel, including himself, to protect the ambassador and his daughter. Ambassador Hayes began his formal presentation, using holographic displays to show Earth's technological achievements, cultural diversity, and potential contributions to the Vryn Empire. The Queen watched with minimal interest, occasionally asking sharp questions that seemed designed to expose humanity's weaknesses rather than understand their strengths. "Your military is primitive," she observed coldly. "Your worlds are scattered and poorly defended. Your species has only been traveling between stars for less than a century. What possible value could you offer to an empire that has endured for 10,000 years? Before the ambassador could respond, alarms began blaring throughout the throne room. The crystalline walls suddenly displayed warning symbols that Jake didn't need translated to understand. Something was very wrong. Vryn warriors burst through the side entrances, but these were not royal guards. Their armor was marked with symbols that Jake's tactical training identified as hostile. A coup attempt or perhaps a terrorist attack by a faction opposed to any human alliance. The Queen's actual guards moved to protect her, but several of the rebels had already made it past the initial defenses. Chaos erupted across the throne room. Energy weapons fired in bright flashes, and the sound of crystalline blades clashing filled the air. Ambassador Hayes grabbed Sophie and tried to move toward the exit, but 3 rebel Vryn warriors had cut off their escape route. The ambassador pushed his daughter behind him, but Jake could see the terror in Sophie's eyes as the aliens advanced. Jake's training took over. He crossed the distance in seconds, placing himself between Sophie and the advancing rebels. "Get behind me," he ordered, his voice calm despite the adrenaline flooding his system. Sophie scrambled to obey, her small hands gripping the back of his armored vest. The first rebel struck with a crystalline blade that sparked against Jake's armor. The impact drove him back a step, but he held his ground. The second rebel fired an energy weapon at close range. The shot hit Jake's chest plate, and the force of it felt like being kicked by a horse. But the armor held. Barely. Jake returned fire with his sidearm, but the Vryn's natural armor deflected most of the damage. He needed to keep them focused on him, keep them away from Sophie. The third rebel joined the attack, and suddenly Jake was fighting for his life against 3 opponents who were stronger, faster, and better armed than he was. A blade cut through his shoulder guard, and Jake felt the sharp pain of torn flesh. An energy blast caught him in the side where his armor was weakest, and he went down on one knee. Behind him, he could hear Sophie crying in fear. He couldn't let them reach her. He wouldn't. Jake forced himself back to his feet and charged forward, tackling the nearest rebel and driving them both to the ground. He took more hits, felt his armor cracking under the assault, tasted blood in his mouth. His vision started to blur, but he kept fighting. Every blow he absorbed was one that didn't reach the child behind him. Across the throne room, Queen Kalira had noticed the situation. She dispatched 2 of her rebels with brutal efficiency, and then turned her attention to where Jake fought desperately to protect Sophie. The Queen's amber eyes widened slightly as she watched the human soldier take blow after blow, never retreating, never giving up. Jake's legs finally gave out, and he collapsed to his knees. He couldn't feel his left arm anymore, and breathing had become difficult. But he stayed between Sophie and the rebels, his body serving as a shield even as consciousness began to slip away. The last thing he saw before darkness took him was Queen Kalira herself striking down the rebel, who had been about to deliver a killing blow. "Impossible," he heard the Queen whisper, but he didn't understand why. Then there was nothing but darkness and the distant sound of Sophie crying his name. The rebel's blade came down toward Sophie's exposed back, and time seemed to slow for Queen Kalira as she watched. The human soldier, already broken and bleeding, somehow found the strength to throw himself sideways. The blade meant for the child instead pierced through Jake's side. the crystalline edge emerging from his back in a spray of red blood that looked shockingly bright against the throne room's purple floor. Jake made a sound that was somewhere between a gasp and a groan, but he didn't move away. Instead, he grabbed the rebel's arm with his one working hand and held on with desperate strength. The rebel tried to pull the blade free for another strike, but Jake's grip was like iron despite his injuries. He was buying time, using his body as an anchor to keep the enemy from reaching Sophie. Queen Kalira crossed the remaining distance in 3 powerful strides. Her crystalline blade swept through the air and separated the rebel's head from his shoulders before he could strike again. The other 2 rebels who had been attacking the human were dispatched just as quickly by the Queen's royal guards who had finally fought their way through the chaos. The throne room was finally secured. Dead and wounded rebels lay scattered across the floor, along with several of the Queen's guards who had fallen protecting their ruler. But Kalira's attention was fixed on the human soldier who had just done something she had never witnessed in all her long years of rule. Jake was still conscious, barely. He had fallen onto his side but was struggling to prop himself up on one elbow, his eyes searching frantically for Sophie. The blade was still embedded in his torso and blood was pooling beneath him at an alarming rate. By all logic, he should have been dead already, but somehow he was still fighting to stay aware. "Sophie," Jake managed to whisper, blood trickling from the corner of his mouth. "Is she safe?" Ambassador Hayes had pulled his daughter away from the carnage and was holding her tightly, both of them shaking but unharmed. "She's safe," Kalira found herself answering, her voice unusually gentle. "Because of you, human." Jake's eyes found Sophie, saw that she was indeed alive and protected by her father. Only then did the tension leave his body. "Good," he breathed out. "That's good." His eyes rolled back and he collapsed fully onto the floor. Kalira immediately called for her medical team, her voice sharp with urgency. "Get him to the healing chambers now. Use whatever resources necessary." Her chief medical officer, a older Vryn named Drath, approached and examined Jake quickly. His expression was grim. "My queen, the human's injuries are catastrophic. He has lost too much blood and his internal organs have sustained severe damage. Even with our technology, the chances of survival are minimal at best." "Then you will exceed expectations," Kalira said coldly. "This human has demonstrated Kethrol the ultimate sacrifice. He will not die on my world if there is any way to prevent it. Am I clear?" Drath's eyes widened at the mention of Kethrol, and he immediately bowed low. "As you command, my queen. We will do everything possible." The medical team carefully removed the blade and lifted Jake onto a floating transport platform. Sophie tried to break free from her father's arms to follow, but Ambassador Hayes held her back gently. "Let them help him, sweetheart. Let them do their job." "He saved me," Sophie sobbed against her father's chest. "The bad alien was going to hurt me and Jake stopped them." "He's going to be okay, right, Daddy? Tell me he's going to be okay." Hayes couldn't answer because he honestly didn't know. He had seen the extent of Jake's injuries, seen the amount of blood on the floor. No human should have survived that long, let alone remained conscious and fighting. But he had learned long ago never to underestimate Jake Morrison's stubborn refusal to quit. Queen Kalira stood in the center of her throne room, looking at the purple floor stained with human blood. Her royal guard commander, a scarred veteran named Vex, approached cautiously. "My queen, the rebellion has been suppressed. The traitors have been identified and eliminated. But I must know, why did you invoke Kethrol for a human? No offender, but they are not of our people." Kalira turned to face her commander and her amber eyes blazed with intensity. "Did you not see what I saw, Vex? That human took 7 killing blows meant for a child that was not even his own offspring. He had no chance of survival, no hope of victory, and he fought anyway. He could have fled, could have abandoned the child to save himself, but he chose sacrifice instead. That is the purest form of Kethrol I have ever witnessed." Vex looked troubled but nodded slowly. "The court will question this decision, my queen. Many believe humans are weak, unworthy of such honor. Then many are fools who cannot recognize strength when they see it." Kalira replied sharply. "I have spent 300 years on this throne, Vex. I have seen countless warriors claim to embody our ideals, but their actions are often calculated for glory and advancement. What that human did today was not calculated. It was instinct, pure and selfless. If we cannot honor that, then we have lost our way as a people." The cleanup of the throne room began, but Kalira did not return to her throne. Instead, she walked through the palace corridors toward the medical wing. ignoring the startled looks from her courtiers. It was highly unusual for the Queen to personally visit the medical facilities, especially for a non-Vrin. The healing chambers were located deep within the palace, in a section built specifically to utilize Thrixia's natural crystalline energies for medical purposes. When Kalira entered, she found a flurry of activity around one particular chamber. Through the transparent walls, she could see Jake's broken body suspended in a field of blue energy, while medical devices worked on his injuries. Drath approached the Queen with a data tablet displaying Jake's vital signs. The readouts were not encouraging. "My Queen, we have stabilized him for now, but his condition remains critical. The human body is remarkably fragile compared to our own. We are having difficulty adapting our healing technology to work with his physiology." "Then consult with their ship's medical officer," Kalira ordered. "Learn what you need to know about human biology and apply it. I want regular updates on his condition every hour." "Every hour, my Queen?" Drath seemed surprised by such close attention to a single patient, even an honored one. "Did I stutter, Drath?" Kalira's tone left no room for argument. The medical officer bowed and hurried away to carry out her orders. Kalira remained by the observation window, watching the medical team work. She tried to understand why she cared so much about the survival of this particular human. Yes, he had demonstrated Kethrol, which demanded respect. But it was more than that. Something about his action had touched something deep within her. Something she thought had been buried under 3 centuries of cold rule and calculated decisions. Hours passed, and Kalira did not leave. Courtiers came with urgent matters requiring her attention, and she dealt with them while still maintaining her vigil by the window. Word spread throughout the palace that the Queen was personally overseeing the human's treatment, and speculation ran wild about what it meant. Ambassador Hayes was eventually allowed to visit along with Sophie. The girl's eyes were red from crying, and she pressed her small hands against the observation window. "Is he going to wake up?" she asked quietly. "We are doing everything possible," Drath told them. "The human is a fighter. His body keeps trying to heal itself even as we work. I have never seen such determination in a patient before." Sophie turned to look at Queen Kalira, and despite her fear and grief, she managed to speak clearly. "Thank you for helping him, Your Majesty. Jake is a good person. He's always been nice to me, even when other soldiers thought it was silly to talk to a kid. He told me stories about Earth and taught me how to play chess. He didn't have to be my friend, but he was anyway." Kalira looked down at the small human child and felt something shift in her chest. "Your protector honored you with his sacrifice, young one. In doing so, he honored all of us. The Vrin do not forget such debts." As the day turned to night on Thrixia, Jake's condition remained precarious but stable. Kalira finally allowed herself to leave the medical wing, but only after giving strict orders to be notified immediately of any changes. She returned to her private chambers and stood on the balcony overlooking the crystal city below. For the first time in years, Queen Kalira the Unyielding felt uncertain. She had witnessed something today that challenged her understanding of strength and honor. She had seen a member of a species she dismissed as weak perform an act of courage that surpassed anything she had seen from her own warriors in decades. And more troubling than that, she found herself caring deeply about whether that human would survive, not just for the sake of honor or politics, but for reasons she was not yet ready to examine too closely. In the medical wing, Jake's vital signs fluctuated on the monitors, caught between life and death. But deep within his unconscious mind, a simple thought kept repeating like a mantra. Sophie was safe. He had done his job. He had protected the child, and somehow that thought gave him the strength to keep fighting even while lost in darkness. The first thing Jake became aware of was the absence of pain. That seemed wrong somehow. He remembered pain, remembered feeling like his body was being torn apart, but now there was only a strange tingling sensation, like his skin was covered in a million tiny bubbles that were popping gently against his flesh. The second thing he noticed was the sound. A soft humming filled his ears, rhythmic and almost musical. It reminded him of wind chimes mixed with the sound of rain on a metal roof. Slowly, carefully, Jake tried to open his eyes. The light was purple and soft, nothing like the harsh white lights of human medical facilities. As his vision cleared, Jake saw that he was in some kind of chamber with transparent walls. Strange crystalline devices surrounded him, pulsing with gentle light that seemed to be in sync with his own heartbeat. He was lying on a surface that felt solid but somehow comfortable, and his body was covered in bandages that glowed faintly blue. "You are awake," the voice startled him, and Jake turned his head slowly toward the source. Queen Kalira stood just outside the chamber, her amber eyes fixed on him with an intensity that made him feel exposed. How long had she been standing there? "Your Majesty," Jake tried to say, but his voice came out as a rough whisper. His throat felt like sandpaper. The chamber's entrance slid open with a soft hiss and the Queen stepped inside. She moved with careful precision, as if worried that any sudden movement might damage him. "You should not try to speak yet, human. Your injuries were severe." Jake tried to sit up, but his body refused to cooperate. Every muscle felt weak and unresponsive. Kalira reached out and placed a hand on his shoulder, gently pushing him back down. The touch was surprisingly gentle for a being who could have crushed his bones without effort. "How long?" Jake managed to ask. 3 days, Kalira answered. 3 days that you spent between life and death while my medical team fought to save you. 3 days that I spent wondering if I would ever see you open your eyes again." The raw honesty in her voice surprised Jake. He had expected formal politeness, maybe gratitude for protecting a diplomatic guest, but there was something else in her tone, something personal. "Sophie," Jake said suddenly, the memory flooding back. "Is she safe? Did the rebels hurt her?" "The child is completely unharmed thanks to you," Kalira assured him. "She has been asking about you constantly. Her father has been forced to restrain her from breaking into the medical wing several times." Jake felt the tension drain from his body. Sophie was safe. That was all that mattered. He had done his job. "What you did," Kalira said slowly, choosing her words with care. "We call it kethril in our language. It means the ultimate sacrifice, when one being willingly gives their life to protect another without thought of survival or reward. It is the foundation of our entire warrior culture, the highest ideal that we teach our young." Jake frowned slightly. "I was just doing my job. Protecting Sophie was my assignment." "No," Kalira said firmly. "I have seen soldiers do their jobs. They fight with skill and courage, yes, but always with an eye toward survival, toward victory. What you did was different. You had no chance of survival, no hope of defeating 3 trained warriors, yet you fought anyway, using your body as a shield even as it was destroyed. That is not duty. That is kethrol." The Queen reached out and touched one of the glowing bandages on Jake's chest. These are healing wraps made from the most advanced medical technology in the Vryn Empire. They are normally reserved only for members of the royal family and the highest military commanders. I ordered my physicians to use whatever resources were necessary to save your life. "Why?" Jake asked. The question came out before he could stop it. "I'm just a human. Your people think we're weak." Kalira's amber eyes met his, and Jake saw something flicker in their depths. Respect, certainly, but also something else he couldn't quite identify. "My people are fools if they continue to believe that after what you demonstrated. You showed more courage in those few minutes than many Vryn warriors show in their entire lives." Over the next few hours, medical officers came and went, checking Jake's vital signs and adjusting the healing devices around him. They treated him with a deference that seemed excessive for a simple security officer. Each one bowed to him before speaking, and they addressed him with titles he didn't understand. Drath, the chief medical officer, explained Jake's condition in terms that were both fascinating and terrifying. "The blade pierced through your torso, damaging several internal organs. You also sustained multiple fractures, severe burns from energy weapons, and catastrophic blood loss. By all logic, you should have died within minutes of the first injury. But I didn't," Jake said simply. "No, you did not," Drath agreed, and there was something like wonder in his voice. "Your body continued fighting long past the point where it should have shut down. We have studied human physiology from the data provided by your ship's medical database, but the theoretical limits and what you actually endured are very different things. Humans are stubborn," Jake said with a weak smile. "We don't know when to quit." "Apparently not," Drath replied, and Jake thought he detected a hint of respect in the alien doctor's tone. "The Queen has ordered me to ensure your full recovery, whatever that requires. You are to receive the best care available in the Empire." After Drath left, Queen Kalira returned. This time she brought a chair with her and sat down beside Jake's bed. The informality of the gesture surprised him. Everything he knew about the Vryn suggested they were rigid and formal, especially when it came to their royalty. "I have been thinking about your people," Kalira said after a long moment of silence. "Before you arrived, I believed humans were weak. Your military is small, your technology primitive compared to ours, your territory insignificant. I saw no value in an alliance with Earth." Jake waited, sensing there was more coming. "But I was measuring strength in the wrong way," the Queen continued. "I looked at weapons and ships and territory. I did not look at what truly makes a species strong. The willingness to sacrifice for others, the ability to face impossible odds without surrendering, the courage to protect the weak even when it costs everything." She leaned forward slightly, her crystalline crown catching the purple light. "You possess something we Vryn have lost over our long history. We have become so focused on hierarchy and power that we have forgotten the meaning behind our own ideals. You reminded me of what Kethral truly means." "I still don't understand why this matters so much," Jake admitted. "I'm grateful for the medical care, but I'm just one soldier. This doesn't change what humanity is." "You are wrong," Kalira said softly. "One person can change everything. One act of courage can shift the foundation of understanding between entire civilizations. Because of what you did, I have agreed to a full alliance with Earth. Because of what you did, the Vryn Empire will stand beside humanity against our common enemies." Jake's eyes widened. "The alliance was approved?" "Yes. Your ambassador Hayes completed the negotiations yesterday. I announced to my court that any species capable of producing individuals like you is worthy of respect and partnership." Kalira paused, and when she spoke again, her voice was quieter. "I also announced something else." Before she could continue, the chamber door opened and Sophie came rushing in, followed by a flustered Ambassador Hayes. "Jake?" the girl cried out, tears streaming down her face. "You're awake! They said you were awake!" Jake felt his chest tighten with emotion as Sophie grabbed his hand and held it tightly. "Hey, kiddo. I'm okay. Everything's okay." "You saved my life," Sophie said, her voice breaking. "The doctor said you should have died, but you didn't. You stayed alive for me." "I promised your dad I'd keep you safe," Jake replied gently. "I always keep my promises." Ambassador Hayes stood at the foot of the bed, his eyes wet with unshed tears. "Lieutenant Commander Morrison, I don't have adequate words to thank you. What you did for my daughter, the price you paid. I will spend the rest of my life in your debt." "Just doing my job, sir," Jake said automatically, though even he was starting to realize it had been more than that. Queen Kalira watched the reunion with an expression that Jake couldn't quite read. When Sophie finally released his hand and stepped back, still sniffling, the Queen spoke again. "I have granted you a title in the Vryn hierarchy, Jake Morrison. You are now recognized as Kethralnor, one who has demonstrated the ultimate sacrifice. It is a rank that has never been given to a non-Vryn in 10,000 years of our history." Jake didn't know what to say to that. A part of him wanted to refuse, to insist he didn't deserve such honor. But he could see in the Queen's eyes that refusing would be an insult. "I am honored, Your Majesty," he said simply. "There is more," Kalira continued, and now Jake definitely detected nervousness in her voice. "I would like you to remain on Thrixia after you have recovered. Not as a prisoner, but as my personal guest. There is much I would like to learn about humans and much I think you could teach me." Ambassador Hayes looked surprised but pleased by the request. Sophie was grinning widely, already excited about the possibility of staying longer on the alien world. But Jake felt a strange flutter in his chest that had nothing to do with his injuries. The way Queen Kalira was looking at him, the careful way she had phrased her request, suggested this was about more than just diplomatic. Jake's recovery took 3 weeks, though the Vryn medical technology cut that time down from what should have been months in a human hospital. Each day brought new strength back to his body, and each day also brought Queen Kalira to his medical chamber. At first, Jake thought it was simply royal courtesy, ensuring her honored guest was being properly cared for. But as the visits continued and grew longer, he began to suspect there was more to it. On the 5th day after waking, Kalira arrived carrying a strange device that looked like a crystal wrapped in metal wire. "This is a translation enhancer," she explained, placing it on the table beside his bed. "The standard translators work adequately for basic communication, but they miss nuances, emotion, subtlety. I thought you might appreciate being able to understand me more clearly." Jake picked up the device and examined it curiously. And you'll be able to understand me better too? That is the idea, Kalira said, and Jake thought he detected amusement in her voice. Though I confess I find your direct way of speaking refreshing. Most people speak to me in circles, afraid to say what they truly mean. I'm not good at playing word games, Jake admitted. My sister used to say I have the diplomatic skills of a hammer. A hammer? Kalira's head tilted slightly, a gesture Jake had learned meant curiosity. A tool for hitting things, Jake explained. Direct. Blunt. Not subtle at all. This time the Queen definitely made a sound that might have been laughter. Perhaps that is exactly what I need, Jake Morrison. Someone who speaks with the directness of a hammer. The way she said his name without his title or rank felt intimate somehow. Jake found himself wondering when they had crossed that line from formal acquaintances to something more casual. He wasn't sure he minded. Over the following days, Kalira began taking Jake on tours of the palace once he was strong enough to walk. She showed him the crystal gardens where plants from 100 worlds grew in carefully tended biodomes. She explained the history of her people, their rise from a single planet to an empire spanning thousands of systems. She spoke about the weight of leadership, the loneliness of the throne, the constant pressure to appear strong and infallible. Do you ever get tired of it? Jake asked one evening as they stood on a balcony overlooking the capital city. The sun was setting, painting the crystalline towers in shades of orange and red. Every day, Kalira admitted quietly, for 300 years I have ruled this empire. 300 years of decisions that affect billions of lives. 300 years of maintaining perfect control, perfect strength, perfect authority. Do you know what that costs, Jake? I can imagine, he replied, thinking about the few times he had been in command during combat situations. The stress of holding lives in your hands was crushing even for a few hours. He couldn't imagine carrying that burden for centuries. I do not think you can, Kalira said, but there was no insult in her tone. I have not allowed myself a moment of weakness in all that time. I cannot show fear, cannot show doubt, cannot show anything that might suggest I am less than absolute in my authority. The moment I do, the challengers will come. That is how Vryn succession works. The strong rule, the weak are replaced. Jake turned to look at her, really look at her. Beneath the imposing presence and the royal bearing, he saw the exhaustion in her eyes. That sounds like a terrible way to live. It is, Kalira agreed. But it is the price of power. She was quiet for a moment before adding, You are the first person in longer than I can remember who speaks to me as if I am simply a person, not a title. Should I stop? Jake asked, suddenly worried he had been disrespectful. No, the Queen said firmly. Please do not stop. It is more valuable to me than you know. Their friendship, if that was the right word for it, deepened as Jake's strength returned. Kalira introduced him to the military academies where young Vryn warriors trained. The students were fascinated by the human who had demonstrated Ketharal, and Jake found himself answering questions about human combat tactics and philosophy. One young warrior, barely into adulthood by Vryn standards, asked Jake why he didn't flee when facing 3 opponents he couldn't defeat. Would it not have been wiser to retreat and return with reinforcements? Maybe, Jake admitted. But I didn't have time to think about what was wise. I saw a child in danger, and my body moved before my brain could catch up. Sometimes the right thing to do isn't the smart thing to do. The young Vryn looked confused by this answer, but Kalira nodded slowly. That is the difference between calculated courage and true Ketharal, she explained to her students. One comes from the mind, the other from the heart. Both have their place, but only one is truly selfless. Jake noticed that the Vryn courtiers watched him and the Queen with growing interest and often disapproval. He overheard whispered conversations that stopped abruptly when he approached. It was clear that not everyone was happy about the time their Queen was spending with a human. He mentioned this to Ambassador Hayes during one of their regular meetings. The diplomat had remained on Thrixia to finalize alliance details and seemed in no hurry to leave. I'm making people uncomfortable, Jake said. Maybe I should return to the Destiny's Hope. Absolutely not, Hayes replied firmly. Do you have any idea how important you've become to human-Vryn relations? The Queen has changed her entire perspective on our species because of you. Your presence here is worth more than a fleet of warships. But I'm just one person, Jake protested. I'm not a diplomat or a politician. I don't know how to navigate all this political stuff. Hayes smiled. That's exactly why you're perfect for this. You're genuine, Jake. You don't have an agenda beyond being decent to people. Queen Kalera sees that, and she values it. Sophie, who was sitting nearby reading a book about Vryn history, looked up and grinned. She likes you, Jake, like really likes you. I can tell. Sophie, her father said warningly, but Jake saw that the ambassador was smiling too. Jake felt his face heat up. She's the queen of an alien empire. I'm just a soldier. There's nothing to like about that situation. If you say so, Sophie replied in a sing-song voice that suggested she didn't believe him at all. That evening, Kalera invited Jake to a private dinner in her personal quarters, something that apparently shocked her staff to the point of near paralysis. Jake wore his dress uniform, the only formal clothing he had with him, and followed a nervous servant through corridors he had never seen before. The Queen's private chambers were surprisingly simple compared to the grand halls of the palace. Yes, everything was made from beautiful crystalline materials, but the space felt lived in rather than displayed. There were personal items scattered around, books and data tablets and what looked like weapons in various states of being cleaned and maintained. Kalera herself was waiting on a balcony that overlooked the night-darkened city. She wore something less formal than her usual royal armor, though Jake didn't have the knowledge to know if it was casual clothing or just a different type of formal wear. What struck him most was that she wasn't wearing her crown. "Thank you for coming," she said as Jake joined her. A table was set with food that the palace kitchens had learned to prepare for human consumption, along with Vryn dishes that Jake had learned to enjoy. "Thank you for inviting me," Jake replied, feeling awkward and out of his depth, "though I'm not sure this is appropriate. Won't your court think it's strange?" "My court already thinks I have lost my mind," Kalera said dryly. "They believe I have become too interested in a human, that I am forgetting my duties and responsibilities." They are probably correct. Jake didn't know how to respond to that admission. They sat down to eat, and for a while they made small talk about Jake's recovery and the ongoing diplomatic negotiations. But eventually Kalera set down her eating utensil and looked at him directly. "I need to tell you something, Jake Morrison, and I need you to listen without interrupting." Her tone was serious, almost nervous. "For 300 years I have lived for duty. I have put the Empire above everything else, above personal desires, above relationships, above any hope of companionship. I believed that was what being queen required." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "Then you arrived, and in a single moment of sacrifice you showed me that I have been lying to myself. Strength is not about being alone. Honor is not about suppressing emotion, and duty does not mean abandoning the possibility of connection." Jake's heart was beating faster now, sensing where this was going but afraid to assume. "I am drawn to you," Kalera continued, and there was vulnerability in her voice that Jake had never heard before. "Not because you are exotic or different, but because you remind me of who I once was before the weight of the crown made me forget. You are brave without being cruel, strong without being domineering, and kind without being weak. You see me as a person, not as a symbol or a title." "Your Majesty," Jake started, but Kalera held up a hand. "I am not finished," she said. "I do not know what this means or where it can go. Our species are different, our worlds are different, and the complications are numerous. But I know that when I am with you, I feel something I have not felt in centuries. I feel hope." Jake took a breath, choosing his words carefully. "I would be lying if I said I didn't feel something too. These past few weeks, getting to know you." The throne room was filled with Vryn nobles, military commanders, and diplomatic representatives from a dozen allied species. At the center of it all stood Queen Kalera in her full royal regalia, her crystalline crown catching the light as she prepared to make an announcement that would send shockwaves through the empire. Jake stood among the human delegation, confused about why he had been specifically requested to attend what was supposed to be a routine diplomatic ceremony. Ambassador Hayes seemed nervous beside him, constantly adjusting his collar and checking his datapad. Sophie stood on Jake's other side, practically vibrating with excitement about something she clearly knew but wouldn't tell him. When Jake had asked what was going on, she had just grinned and said he would find out soon enough. Queen Kalera raised her hand, and the assembled crowd fell silent immediately. "Members of the court, honored guests, I have called you here today to make two important announcements regarding the alliance between the Vryn Empire and humanity." Jake relaxed slightly. This was just official confirmation of the treaty that Hayes had been negotiating. Nothing to worry about. First, Kalera continued, her voice carrying easily through the vast chamber. I officially ratify the alliance treaty between our peoples. Earth and its territories are now under the protection of the Vryn Empire, and humanity is granted full trading rights and military cooperation with all Vryn forces. The announcement was met with mixed reactions. Some Vryn nobles showed approval, while others displayed obvious displeasure. The allied species representatives seemed intrigued by this development. Humanity, despite their small territory, had just become a legitimate power in galactic politics simply by association with the Vryn. Second, Kalera said, and her eyes found Jake in the crowd. I wish to make a personal announcement that affects both our peoples and demonstrates the depth of connection that is possible between our species. Jake felt a sudden sense of dread. Whatever was coming next, he had a feeling he wasn't going to like it. Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison demonstrated Kethril in its purest form, the Queen proclaimed. His actions honored not just the child he protected, but our entire civilization by showing us what true sacrifice means. For this I granted him the title of Kethrelnor, making him the first non-Vryn to receive such recognition. The crowd murmured, but this was old news to them by now. Jake shifted uncomfortably, wishing he could disappear. However, his actions affected me more deeply than I initially realized, Kalera continued, and there was something in her tone that made the entire room go silent. In the weeks since his recovery, I have come to understand that Jake Morrison possesses qualities that are exceedingly rare, regardless of species. His courage, his compassion, his integrity, and his wisdom have impressed me greatly. Jake's stomach dropped as he suddenly understood where this was going. No, she wouldn't. She couldn't. Therefore, Queen Kalera announced, her voice steady and formal, I wish Jake Morrison to remain on Thrixia permanently as my honored companion and advisor. Furthermore, I declare my intention to court him according to both Vryn and human customs, with the goal of making him my official consort. The throne room erupted into chaos. Vryn nobles shouted in protest or surprise. Allied species representatives talked rapidly among themselves. The human delegation stood in stunned silence, except for Sophie, who was grinning like this was the best day of her life. Jake felt like he had been hit by a transport shuttle. Court her consort? The queen of the most powerful empire in the galaxy wanted to date him with the intention of marriage. His mind struggled to process this impossible reality. Ambassador Hayes recovered first, his diplomatic training kicking in. Your Majesty, this is most unexpected. Might we have time to discuss this development privately? Of course, Kalera replied, though Jake thought he detected disappointment in her voice. Jake Morrison, would you join me in my private council chamber? Ambassador Hayes, you may accompany him if you wish. The walk to the council chamber felt like a dream. Jake was aware of people staring at him, of whispered conversations erupting in his wake, but it all felt distant and unreal. Sophie squeezed his hand before he left the throne room and whispered, It's going to be okay, Jake, trust me. Inside the council chamber, Kalera dismissed all her advisors, leaving just herself, Jake, and Ambassador Hayes. The moment the door closed, some of the formal stiffness left the Queen's posture. She looked at Jake with those amber eyes that had become so familiar to him, and he saw vulnerability there. I apologize for the public nature of the announcement, she said quietly. It is Vryn custom to make such declarations formally, but I realize now that I should have warned you first. You think? Jake said, then immediately regretted his tone. I'm sorry, Your Majesty, I didn't mean to be disrespectful. I'm just trying to understand what just happened. You are upset, Kalera observed. I expected as much. Please speak freely. I want to know your true thoughts. Jake took a deep breath. Kalera, I care about you. These past few weeks have been amazing, and I've enjoyed every moment we've spent together. But you're talking about marriage, about me staying here permanently, about becoming your consort. That's huge. That's life-changing. And you announced it to your entire court before even asking me how I felt about it. In Vryn culture, the declaration comes first, Kalera explained. It is a sign of serious intent, a public commitment that cannot be withdrawn without dishonor. I thought I was paying you the highest compliment possible, but I'm not Vryn, Jake said, frustrated. I'm human. We like to discuss these things privately before making them public. We like to have a choice in the matter. There was a long silence. Finally, Kalera spoke, and her voice was smaller than Jake had ever heard it. Do you wish to refuse? The pain in that question broke Jake's heart. He realized that beneath all the royal power and alien culture differences, this was just a person who had finally opened up to someone, only to fear rejection. I don't know, he admitted honestly. This is all happening so fast. 3 weeks ago I was just a security officer doing his job. Now I'm being asked to give up everything I know, leave Earth permanently and marry an alien queen. That's terrifying, Kalira. Ambassador Hayes, who had been quiet until now, cleared his throat.
If I may, Your Majesty, perhaps Jake needs time to fully understand what this would mean.
The implications for his life, for his career, for his future? What would it mean? Jake asked, looking at Kalira directly. Explain it to me like I'm a child because I genuinely don't understand Vryn marriage customs or what being your consort would involve. Kalira sat down, gesturing for Jake to do the same. In Vryn culture, we bond for life. There is no divorce, no separation once the bond is made. A queen's consort becomes her equal in all but name. You would have authority over much of the empire, though the final decisions would remain mine. You would be expected to advise me, to support me, and to represent our bond publicly. And what about Earth? Jake asked. Would I ever see my home again? Of course, Kalira said immediately. I would never ask you to abandon your people. You could maintain contact with your family, visit Earth as often as you wished, and serve as an official liaison between our species. I would adapt our customs to accommodate your humanity, something no Vryn queen has ever done before. Jake rubbed his face tiredly. And your court? Half of them looked ready to start another rebellion when you made that announcement. They don't want a human consort. They will accept what I decree, Kalira said firmly. But you are right that there will be resistance. Some of my nobles believe I am making a mistake, that I am letting emotion cloud my judgment. They think you are unworthy because you are not Vryn. Maybe they're right, Jake said quietly. Maybe I'm not qualified for this. I'm just a soldier, Kalira. I don't know anything about ruling an empire or navigating alien politics. Kalira reached across the table and took Jake's hand in hers. The gesture was bold, intimate, and very unqueenly. You know more than you think. You understand honor, courage, and compassion. You have wisdom that comes from living honestly, rather than politically. Those qualities are worth more than any amount of political training. Ambassador Hayes spoke up again. Your Majesty, if I might make a suggestion? Give Jake 3 days to consider this fully. Let him think about what it would mean. Consult with whomever he needs to and make a decision without the pressure of the entire court watching. Kalira looked like she wanted to argue, but finally nodded. 3 days, she agreed. Jake Morrison, take whatever time you need to decide. But please understand that my declaration was not made lightly. I have lived for 300 years without allowing myself to feel what I feel for you. I do not expect you to return those feelings, but I hope you will at least consider the possibility. Jake left the council chamber with his head spinning. 3 days to decide the entire course of his future. 3 days to figure out if he could really give up everything he knew for a relationship with an alien queen. 3 days to determine if what he felt for Kalira was strong enough to overcome all the obstacles between them. Sophie found him in the palace gardens that evening, sitting by a fountain and staring at nothing. She sat down beside him without saying anything. Jake spent the first of his 3 days talking to everyone he could find who might help him understand what he was getting into. He started with Drath, the chief medical officer, asking the questions that had been bothering him since Kalira's announcement. Can humans and Vryn even have a real relationship? Jake asked bluntly. I mean, we're completely different species. Different biology, different cultures, different everything. Drath considered the question carefully. Biologically, you are compatible in the ways that matter for companionship. Vryn do not reproduce the way many species do. We create offspring through a combination of genetic material and crystalline matrices. Your human DNA could theoretically be incorporated into that process, though the offspring would be more Vryn than human. Jake hadn't even considered children, and the thought made his head spin even more. But what about the basic stuff? Can we even touch each other safely? Are there health risks? None that we have identified, Drath assured him. The Queen's scales may feel unusual to you, but they are not sharp or dangerous when she chooses to keep them smooth. Vryn have excellent control over their body temperature, so she would not burn or freeze you with contact. In fact, I believe physical touch between your species could be quite pleasant for both parties. The clinical nature of the discussion made Jake uncomfortable, but he needed to know these things. And the lifespan thing? Vryn lived for centuries, right? I'll be dead of old age while she's still in her prime. Drath's expression became sympathetic. That is true. However, we have life extension technologies that could significantly increase your lifespan. Not to Vrin levels, perhaps, but you could potentially live for 200 years or more with our medical support. The Queen has already indicated she would make such treatments available to you. 200 years. The number was staggering. Jake thanked Drath and moved on to his next conversation, this one with Vex, the Royal Guard commander who had been present during the rebel attack. Vex met him in one of the training halls, where young Vrin warriors were practicing combat techniques. The Scarred commander watched his soldiers with a critical eye before turning his attention to Jake. You wish to know if the Queen's declaration was wise? Vex stated rather than asked. I want to know if I'll put her in danger by accepting, Jake clarified. If having a human consort will weaken her position or cause problems for the Empire. Vex was quiet for a long moment, watching the warriors train. There will be those who oppose this union, some because they believe humans are inferior, others because they fear change, still others because they have their own plans for who the Queen should bond with. But I will tell you what I told the Queen when she consulted me before making her announcement. The commander turned to face Jake directly. I have served Queen Kalira for 80 years. In that time, I have never seen her show interest in any potential consort. She has always put duty above personal desires, which has made her a strong ruler but a lonely one. When I saw her after you awakened from your injuries, I saw something I had never seen before. I saw happiness, Vex gestured to the training warriors. A strong ruler needs more than just military power and political skill. They need something to fight for beyond abstract concepts of duty. You give the Queen that. You make her remember why our ideals matter. That does not weaken her, human. It strengthens her. Jake felt something loosen in his chest at those words. Thank you, Commander. Do not thank me yet, Vex replied with something that might have been humor. If you accept the Queen's offer, I will be responsible for your combat training. We cannot have the Queen's consort be unable to defend himself. You will learn to fight properly, or you will suffer in the training halls. Despite everything, Jake found himself smiling. I look forward to it, sir. His next conversation was over a video call with Earth. His sister Casey appeared on the screen with her characteristic messy red hair and concerned expression. Jake, what the hell is going on? The news is full of stories about you and some alien queen. Please tell me you're okay. I'm okay, Casey, Jake assured her. Better than okay, actually. But I need your advice on something. He explained the situation as clearly as he could, watching his sister's expression cycle through shock, confusion, and finally thoughtful consideration. When he finished, Casey was quiet for a moment before speaking. Do you love her? She asked simply. The question cut right through all of Jake's complicated thoughts about duty, politics, and cultural differences. I think I do, he admitted. I know it's crazy and it's only been a few weeks, but when I'm with her, everything feels right. She's amazing, Casey. Strong and wise and lonely and trying so hard to do the right thing for everyone, and for some reason she chose me. Then what are you even questioning? Casey asked. Jake, you've spent your whole life putting duty first, protecting other people, following orders. Maybe it's time you did something just for yourself, something that makes you happy. But I'd be leaving Earth, Jake protested. Leaving you, leaving everything familiar. Casey smiled sadly. You've been leaving me behind for years, Jake. Every time you shipped out for another deployment, every time you took on a dangerous assignment. At least this time you'd be leaving for something good instead of running toward danger. I'd still visit, Jake said quickly. The Queen said I could come back to Earth as often as I wanted. So you've already decided, Casey observed. You're just scared to admit it. Jake realized she was right. He had already made his choice on some level, probably days ago. He was just afraid to accept it because it meant his life would change forever. But then again, his life had already changed the moment he threw himself between Sophie and those rebel warriors. On the second day, Jake asked Kalira to show him more of what his life would actually be like if he stayed. The Queen took him to the residential wing of the palace where consorts and bonded pairs lived. The quarters were spacious and comfortable, designed for privacy while still maintaining connection to the royal household. These would be our chambers, Kalira explained, showing him a suite that was larger than his entire apartment back on Earth. You would have your own space when you needed solitude, but we would share the main living areas. She showed him the offices where he would work as an advisor and liaison, She introduced him to other members of the royal household, including the Queen's primary advisor, an ancient Vryn named Thex who had served 3 different monarchs. Thex examined Jake with eyes that had seen centuries of history. "You are very young," the old Vryn observed, "and very different from what I expected for our Queen's chosen one." "I get that a lot," Jake replied dryly. "Good," Thex said unexpectedly. "The Queen needs someone who will keep her humble, remind her that power is not everything. I believe you will do that well, human." That evening, Kalira took Jake to a private balcony that overlooked the entire capital city. The crystalline towers were lit up against the darkening sky, creating a display that took Jake's breath away. They stood in comfortable silence for a while before Kalira spoke. "I have been thinking about what you said, about how I announced my intentions without discussing them with you first," she said quietly. "I realize now that I approached this from a Vryn perspective without considering your humanity. I apologize for that." "You don't need to apologize," Jake replied. "I understand better now how your culture works, but I appreciate you saying it." Kalira turned to face him, and in the fading light she looked less like an imposing alien queen and more like just a woman hoping for something she was afraid to want. "Jake Morrison, I need you to understand something. I am not asking you to stay because I need a political alliance or because I want a trophy to display. I am asking because I have come to care for you deeply, because you have shown me parts of myself I thought were lost." She took his hand, the gesture still feeling new and intimate between them. "I know I am asking you to give up much. Your career, your home world, your comfortable life. But I promise you that if you choose to stay, I will spend every day trying to make that sacrifice worthwhile. I will be the best partner I can be. We'll honor your humanity even as you adapt to our ways and will never take your presence for granted." Jake squeezed her hand gently. "Can I ask you something personal?" "Anything," Kalira replied. "In 300 years you never found anyone who made you feel this way? Never considered bonding before now?" Kalira's expression became distant. "I had suitors, many of them. Strong warriors, brilliant strategists, powerful nobles. But they all wanted to bond with the Queen, with the power and status that came with it. None of them saw me, Kalira, the person beneath the crown. None of them made me feel like I could be something other than perfect all the time." She looked at Jake with such open vulnerability that it made his heart ache. "You see me, Jake, you argue with me when you think I am wrong. You make me laugh. You show me kindness without expecting anything in return. That is why I want you to stay. Not for politics or tradition, but because I cannot imagine facing the next 100 years without you beside me." Jake felt the last of his resistance crumble. He had been approaching this decision like it was a military mission, analyzing risks and strategic implications. But this wasn't a mission. This was his life, and maybe Casey. The throne room had never been so crowded. Every Vryn noble who could make the journey had come to witness this historic moment. Representatives from dozens of allied species filled the chamber, along with a full delegation from Earth that included several high-ranking government officials. Media drones from across the galaxy floated at designated positions, broadcasting the ceremony to billions of viewers. Jake stood in a private chamber adjacent to the throne room, adjusting his formal attire for the 10th time. He wore a uniform that was part human military dress and part Vryn ceremonial armor, created specifically for this occasion. The design symbolized the bridge he was becoming between 2 species. And while Jake thought it looked impressive, he felt ridiculous in it. "Stop fidgeting," Ambassador Hayes said, adjusting Jake's collar with practiced hands. "You look fine. Better than fine, actually." "I feel like I'm going to throw up," Jake admitted. Sophie, who was dressed in a beautiful formal gown and designated as an honored witness for the ceremony, giggled. "You're just nervous. The Queen is probably nervous too." Jake doubted that. In the week since he had accepted Kalira's proposal, he had watched her handle the political fallout with perfect composure. She had silenced dissenters with logic and authority, negotiated compromises with reluctant nobles, and prepared for this ceremony with meticulous attention to detail. Kalira didn't do nervous. The door opened and Vex entered wearing his full ceremonial armor. "It is time," the guard commander announced. "The Queen is ready to begin." Jake took a deep breath and followed Vex into the throne room. The moment he stepped through the entrance, every eye in the massive chamber turned toward him. The weight of their attention was crushing, but Jake kept his head high and his stride steady. He had faced down armed rebels and nearly died protecting Sophie. He could handle a few judgmental stares. The center of the throne room had been transformed into a ceremonial space that blended human and Vryn traditions. Flowers from Earth surrounded a raised platform made of Thrixian crystal. Human and Vryn symbols were woven together in decorative patterns that covered the walls. It was beautiful and strange and perfectly representative of what this union meant. Then Jake saw Kalira, and everything else faded away. The queen stood at the center of the platform, and she was magnificent. She wore ceremonial armor that seemed to be made of living crystal, shimmering with internal light. Her crown had been replaced with a more elaborate piece that incorporated both Vryn and human design elements. But what struck Jake most was her expression. She was smiling, openly and genuinely, and there was no mask of royal composure hiding her emotions. Jake climbed the steps to the platform and took his place across from Kalira. An elderly Vryn priest stood between them, ready to conduct the ceremony according to ancient tradition. But first, Ambassador Hayes stepped forward to speak, representing humanity in this historic moment. "We are here to witness a union that would have been unimaginable just months ago," Hayes began, his voice amplified throughout the chamber. "When Lieutenant Commander Jake Morrison was assigned to protect my daughter during our diplomatic mission, I never could have predicted this outcome. But sometimes the most important moments in history come from unexpected places and unexpected people." He turned to look at Jake. "Jake, you have served humanity with courage and dedication throughout your military career. You have demonstrated the best qualities of our species: bravery, compassion, and an unwavering commitment to protecting those who cannot protect themselves. Today you take on a new role, not just for yourself, but for all of humanity. You become a bridge between our worlds, a symbol of what is possible when two species choose understanding over fear." Hayes then addressed Kalira. "Your Majesty, in choosing Jake as your consort, you honor all of humanity. You demonstrate that strength can be found in unexpected places, that courage transcends species, and that love can bloom even in the vast emptiness of space. We trust you with one of our own, knowing that you will treat him with the respect and care he deserves." The ambassador stepped back, and the Vryn priest began the traditional ceremony. He spoke in the Vryn language, his words translated for the non-Vryn observers, telling the story of Kethral and how the ultimate sacrifice was the foundation of all meaningful bonds. He spoke about strength through partnership, about two becoming one without losing their individual identities. Then it was time for the vows. Kalira spoke first, her voice clear and steady but filled with emotion. "Jake Morrison, you came to my world as a stranger, and through a single act of selfless courage you changed everything I thought I knew about strength and honor. You showed me that compassion is not weakness, that vulnerability is not failure, and that opening my heart does not make me less of a queen." She reached out and took his hands, and Jake felt the slight tremor in her grip that revealed her nerves. "I vow to honor you as my equal, to respect your humanity even as you adapt to our ways, and to be worthy of the faith you have placed in me. I vow to stand beside you through whatever challenges we face, to protect you as fiercely as you protected that child, and to love you for as long as I draw breath." Now it was Jake's turn,